This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, great. So let me jump into my presentation. Thank you, Abby, for that introduction. It's really good to be here. And like I said, I really miss being at the university or in college. So it'll be fun to talk to you guys today. So yeah, again, my name is Hannah. I'm with the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, Massachusetts chapter, and I coordinate a group called the Western Massachusetts Regenerative Food System. And today we're going to be talking about bioregional food systems and community empowerment. And the presentation today is going to be a little bit more conceptual and philosophical as opposed to case study based. And the reason why I chose that format, even though there's so much rich context and examples of people who are doing this, I want to take the time to do a little bit of dreaming and imagining. And so while we're in this presentation conversation, just like keep your eye out for like what really speaks to you and who you are within this movement. And maybe like cases that you've seen that you relate to or whatever it may be. That's what I really care about today is getting the concept through. I studied a little bit of this and have really excelled with the bioregional food systems as a environmental solution since my studies. So I'm really excited to be here today. And the Western Massachusetts Regenerative Food System, like Abby mentioned a little bit, my job within that is to connect the dots on local food and look at the gaps and bottlenecks. So basically within a system, we have resources and people and relationships, everything's flowing through. And we also have goals and aspirations. And when we're looking for solutions to whether it be like food access or environmental health or reforestation, there's things that might be missing in that gap or in that system. So there's gaps. And then there's also bottlenecks, like in the case of infrastructure, like you grow all this like really beautiful poultry or all these apples and you're trying to get them to your customers. And then you hit this bottleneck where items can't get through, or like say it's soil or whatever, there may be a link in that supply network. So I'm looking at the networks emerging in order to fill in some of those things and really allow regenerative food to thrive. Because we can farm all we want, but can we like get it to the place? Well, I don't know if we can really farm all we want. There's some barriers there too, but yeah. How do we get our food system to thrive? And again, for a little bit of context, this is from a book that I'm reading called Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell. She's a Penobscot woman. That's a nation up in Maine, Indigenous nation up in Maine. And it's been a really, really great book. I highly recommend it. I'm only like a third of the way in and just gives me shivers. She says, "We all come into this world with a set of instructions. These instructions guide us towards our highest purpose. They lead us to the essential truths that live deep within us. This truth is encoded into our DNA. It is embedded in our genetic memory. It vibrates within us on a cellular level. Every element of life carries this vibration. Every living being has its own vibrational tone. When these tones are combined, they form the voice of creation. If we learn to listen closely, we can begin to hear that voice and allow it to guide our steps through life. Then we can begin to attune our daily actions with our higher purpose and become who we were meant to be." And I really just like that sort of blip in the beginning to set the stage of like, what we're trying to get back to, our roots within this all. So I think healing is really what we're moving towards. So a little bit about what we're going to get into includes our actual bioregions. So you see on the map that says Northern Highlands, Northeastern Coastal Zone, et cetera, et cetera. The bioregion is the place where, hold on, let's see, one second. I'm having some trouble with my notes. That's okay. Oh yeah, here we go. So, sorry, I'm getting little technical difficulties here. My Zoom is kind of freaking out. Well, so a bioregion basically doesn't have boundaries. It's the natural expressions of the earth, or, you know, natural insofar as humans have impacted them pre and post colonization. Bioregions don't necessarily respond to state lines. Forests have their breadth of how they live. We have critters who live within those ecosystems, and what I'm suggesting here is a way to work with our bioregions and the natural power that our ecosystems have, and really concentrating on the gifts that the earth offers us within the context of these bioregions, as opposed to, which I'll get into a little bit later, something that's more globalized and extractive. And yeah, rather than man-made divisions. And you'll see there's a map. If you haven't been to this website yet, I think it's called nativeland.ca. It's really cool. You can check out the indigenous communities and their homelands on this map, and it's really great as far as providing some context as to where we are in the history of the place. And as you can see, well, so I'm joining you from Greenfield, Mass today, and that is on the in the Pecumtuck homelands. And it looks like perhaps your school might be there as well. And yeah, you'll notice that there's some overlap between these territories. And I find that so interesting, because what it means to me is that there's inherent trade within these areas, and that people have been exchanging, and that we've been kind of working with the different resources for a long time now. The Wabanaki Confederacy, I really like, because I mean, I respect all these nations, but if you look at their territory and then you look at the bioregional map, you'll notice that that line is really interesting in the sense of the swath that it covers. And that's mostly because a lot of those people were semi-nomadic peoples. And what that means is that they weren't necessarily rooted in decided to come into the presentation. They weren't necessarily rooted in one place, that they actually moved in the seasons and followed the resources. And so that just gives you an idea of how bioregionalism has been core to the land for a while now, and that trade and co-harvesting happens in certain areas as well. So what can this land use history say about our current land use patterns and culture, and what that says about land ownership, and all of these stories that we've been told for a long time about what is the reality that we're living and what isn't. And perhaps there's some symptoms that are arising when we look to our waters and our forests, and really just read into what our landscapes are trying to tell us. And so when we have this bioregional, oh my gosh, my cat, so sorry. She's never done this before. Oh my gosh. So yeah, how might we be able to shift our narrative of land use patterns depending on the view that we take, and when we really respect the native territories and places where we inhabit, and oh my gosh, get out of here. And what we can do moving forward with our current socioeconomic hardships. All right, so I'm sure that a lot of you have probably seen the story of Stuff, but I am going to play it because I think it gives us, I really love Annie Leonard and what she, back in, yeah, I learned about Annie Leonard and the story of Stuff back in probably 2011. And she like totally rocked my world. So I'm just gonna give this as a little frame today. Abby, give me a thumbs up if you think there. Okay.
Do you have one of these? I got a little obsessed with mine. In fact, I got a little obsessed with all my stuff. Have you ever wondered where all the stuff we buy comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop wondering about that, so I looked it up. And what the textbook said is that stuff moves through a system from extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. All together, it's called the materials economy. Well, I looked into it a little bit more. In fact, I spent 10 years traveling the world, tracking where our stuff comes from and where it goes. And you know what I found out? That is not the whole story. There is a lot missing from this explanation. For one thing, this system looks like it's fine. No problem. But the truth is, it's a system in crisis. And the reason it's a system in crisis is it's a linear system and we live on a finite planet. And you cannot run a linear system on a finite planet indefinitely. Every step along the way, this system is interacting with the real world. In real life, it's not happening on a blank white page. It's interacting with societies, cultures, economies, the environment. And all along the way, it's bumping up against limits. Limits we don't see here because the diagram is incomplete. So let's go back through. Let's fill in some of the blanks and see what's missing. Well, one of the most important things that's missing is people. Yes, people. People live and work all along this system. And some people in this system matter a little more than others. Some have a little more say. Who are they? Well, let's start with the government. Now, my friends tell me I should use a tank to symbolize the government, and that's true in many countries and increasingly in our own. After all, more than 50% of our federal tax money is now going to the military. But I'm using a person to symbolize the government because I hold true to the vision and values the government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. It's the government's job to watch out for us, to take care of us. That's their job. Then along came the corporation. Now, the reason the corporation looks bigger than the government is that the corporation is bigger than the government. Of the 100 largest economies on Earth now, 51 are corporations. And as the corporation has grown in size and power, we've seen a little change in the government where they're a little more concerned in making sure everything's working out for those guys than for us.
Okay, great. So how many of you have seen that video before? Yeah, okay. So this video, it's like 17 minutes long or something like that. And she really goes into some amazing detail about our materials economy. And the thing I want to take away from that most is how extractive our current resource systems are. So whether we buy food, buy clothing, buy electronics, you name it, dog food, whatever it might be, it's a lot more rooted in extraction and not accounting for externalized costs. So that's on people, on environment, on culture, and sort of the things that the repercussions, or perhaps we could say the symptoms that we're all feeling, and the things that have probably like driven us here today. And kind of like Sherry was saying, that DNA, that call, that voice of what we want to be healing. And yeah, so all those externalities, and I want to start with mentioning the baseline for the U.S. economy, and a lot of that, first off, is based on stolen land, and then next on the backs of enslaved peoples. And the reason why I picked this picture is not only is it so bountiful with cotton, showing how amazing these enslaved farmers were, but also because it's cotton. It's not food, it's agriculture though. So it shows that our land use patterns, it might be, kind of like, well, duh, you grow cotton, but it's a lot deeper than that. It's connection with land. And so thinking about all the things that we consume, and food is one of those things. So, again, really extractive. And some of the reasons why I want to turn our attention towards bioregionalism is partially because In all three of these pictures, I'll get into the context a little bit more. These are all happening on a globalized scale. So areas are kind of like epicenters for production and then get shipped all across the world. And you have that really enables the ability to take and take and take and take without needing to give back, because the product isn't staying within the community and nurturing the community. It's going far, far away and feeding other people or clothing other people, whatever that may be. That's not intrinsically bad. I'm not trying to put a damper on the benefits of globalized trade. However, it really sets the stage for the ability to continually extract from certain environments and certain communities, mostly Black, Brown, Indigenous peoples. And the two other, so on that bottom picture, that is the reason why I have that there is a hog farm. Really, a lot of these hog farms are in the North Carolina area. And you can see that sludge pool where all the hog waste goes. And again, you have this investment in this area that extracts very many things and doesn't really care too much about what it leaves behind. Additionally, you get monocropped lands, and again, super extractive, and it doesn't really appreciate the natural gifts of that area, whether it may have historically been grasslands or forest areas. Monocrops are not rooted in biomimicry, and that vibrates out on a globalized scale. So yeah, living in a really extractive economy right now. Let's see. No, Annie Leonard. Okay. This looks all right to you? Okay, good. So I'm going to start with regenerative agriculture itself. And this is regenerative agriculture builds on a lot of lessons that we've learned today, or that have gotten us to where we are. And it's kind of like the new organic, if you will. But really, these practices have been happening for years and years and years, especially from our Indigenous folks who really engage in reciprocity. But the point of regenerative agriculture is to improve the health of land and start to get back into reciprocity and do more good than harm. And some of those principles include cover crops. So making sure that our land is covered and that our soil doesn't erode. Integrating livestock so that it's not just monocropped with plants or animals, but emulating forest systems where animals very much interact with their landscape, and they add fertilizers and return nutrients to the soil, and can eat. So you have a lot of co-benefits from integrating livestock. Farmers are starting to transition to no-till systems by minimizing soil disturbance. We can keep our mycelial networks, so our fungi networks, intact. Every time we till, we break those up, and mycelium are so good at transporting nutrients. Every time we till, we make our soil more susceptible to soil erosion, and soil loss is a huge issue in like the Great Plains, for example. I think like the mollisols, they say on the Great Plains have diminished like 9 inches since I think that's the number, I'm not totally sure, since the colonization by white people and the agricultural practices that we've brought to the area. And that's huge. Tons of biodiversity, productivity lost and brought into our rivers, and creates all sorts of issues. If you have any questions on like these specifics, I'd be happy to address them at the end of our presentation. Minimizing chemical inputs, which we very well know about, as far as like the glyphosate and synthetic nitrogen and what that does to our ecosystems. Crop rotations are really important because certain crops take nutrients out of the soil And if we use the same crops every single year, it will keep taking the same nutrients out, but we can plant things like beans that relieve or replenish nitrogen in the soil. And there's some really amazing crop rotation patterns that farmers have been adopting in order to keep nutrients in the soil. And then, of course, increasing biodiversity, because the variety, this kind of almost goes without saying, I think, especially to those of you who are in environmental studies, because we know that biodiversity creates resilience. We know that it fills in niches. We know that pests eat other pests and our plants can grow healthier. And when things are out of balance is when we start to experience more disease and therefore crop loss. And the other thing I guess I would say here is regenerative agriculture is the foundation, but really what it needs is relationship. It's missing relationship in this diagram and our relationships to each other. It's missing reciprocity. So this is a very scientific way to approach the agricultural process. And what we're doing by looking at cultural shift, community empowerment, and bioregional food systems is taking the principles of regenerative agriculture and embedding them a little bit more into culture and really taking on those values of reciprocity and embodying this a little bit more to the core. And an example of this, I made this graphic when I was looking at closed loop waste systems and trying to figure out how we minimize waste and look a little bit more deeply into food loss. So we put all this energy and time into growing food, and then the last thing we want is for it to go to waste. So I made this little closed loop system where we grow our foods in the most regenerative ways and keeping our inputs low and using what's on site. We want our harvesting to be economically sound, making sure that people get paid and that our farmers get paid. We want to glean fields when there's foods left over that isn't economically beneficial for a farmer to take, and we want it to be thorough. When we eat our foods, we want it to be equally distributed. We want to be able to process and preserve our foods so that they're edible by many peoples, and that we get them, keep our food into the wintertime, especially in New England. That's critical to survival and has been for a really long time. So as far as food security goes, preservation is huge. And then add value to our products so that they can be distributed again. When I wrote feed because we want to give our scraps to our animals and increase our yield. So not only feeding ourselves, but we're feeding other entities within our biome. And no sense, I have a story. We have a community chicken coop at the senior center across the street, and I had these apples that turned in my refrigerator because they got like kind of too cold and freezer burnt. And so I brought them down to the chickens, like 5 or 6 apples. And the chickens went nuts, like totally nuts for these apples. Like I've never seen a chicken eat an apple so fast. I was like, how is that fitting in your little chicken belly? I couldn't believe it. But it was so gratifying, as opposed to that going into a landfill and generating a bunch of methane and leachate and sludge. So there's a lot of opportunity to feed critters with our animal waste. And then of course, composting, returning, biodigesting. These are not new concepts. Our forest floors do this every day. And so making sure that we tap into that power. And this is kind of an extension of what I was mentioning earlier, but think about all the things that we consume. And what if we to look at food as a form of nourishment? Our textiles, our cosmetics, our wood products, things that we make art with, our instruments and music, our energy, rubbers, latexes. There's so much more that goes within this graphic as far as the things that we consume or the things that become us. That regenerative agriculture or food alone doesn't necessarily tap into the concept of nourishment. And what if we were putting our energy on a bioregional level behind the things that our forests and our landscapes are really good at generating, and we become one with those items. So it generates nourishing relationships, lifestyle, and culture, because we are what we eat, right? And we are also what we consume. So do we want it to be toxic and monocropped and extractive, or do we want it to be replenishing and delicious and good for our souls? Wait, shoot, I don't know why it keeps doing this. Well, sorry, can you still see my presentation mode? Okay. So back to bioregionalism. Why is it important to have a bioregional focus and not just going diet-based or going organic or vegan? There's this little graphic that says vegan diet is not cruelty-free. You can see this white person holding a tomato. They look relatively fit, and on the ground we have our harvesters, our farmers, and these people who are holding up the food system and feed us every day. And so vegetables and things that have a lower carbon footprint might not necessarily account for externalities. It might very well be monocropped heads of lettuce or soybeans or whatever it may be, and to account for all the farmers and the people who work along those supply chains, that's not necessarily a thing. And I'm not trying to bash a vegan or a vegetarian or a meat diet or whatever it may be. I think people have the ability to choose for themselves with the situations that they have. But just remembering that we're a part of a whole. We can't, it's all living and connected. We cannot detach something from another. It's a big web of life. And why bioregionalism is a solution to that is because it's rooted in community and in empowerment of our communities. So bioregionalism is rooted in systems change. It's very different than globalization. It's rooted in land nourishment and the ability to trade and exchange with each other. It is rooted in biomimicry and thinking, what do our landscapes need, and how can we as a community act like a forest or a prairie, and how might our communities do that, and how do we help our environments do that? And then like I said, there's community and power and trade rooted in bioregionalism, where diet turns into more of a lifestyle and that waste becomes food. So like I said, there's that regenerative, if we're not working on a globalized level, waste stays more within the system. And the inputs and the outputs start to balance each other out instead of being distributed amongst the supply chain. Gerald, could you, do you mind muting yourself, Gerald? Thanks. Hi, welcome. So how do we close that loop and keep our inputs and our outputs as much like an ecosystem as we possibly can? And if we work on a bioregional level, we have more of an ability to do that as opposed to a globalized economy. Which brings me to the concept of food sovereignty. And this is like a big new buzzword. Well, maybe not that new, but a lot of people in my groups have been talking about it lately, as well as the word regenerative. It's kind of like this new systems change, or the way that we can start to look at our economic and social systems. So food sovereignty is the right of peoples to a healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agricultural systems. It puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies, rather than the demands of markets and corporations. And so if we close that loop, if we bring it more to a bioregional level, and are embedded with diversity of resources and economy, then there's more of a room for self-expression and for healing. Because, Annie Leonard in that movie, in the clip before, she says that the corporation is by the people and for the people, and they work for us, and they're supposed to take care of us. And food sovereignty says that we take care of each other. And it's not just about food. Again, remember that food is nourishment, and how we can nourish each other by interacting with our landscapes. And that's really, really critical. On the right here is a good friend of mine. Her name is Abby, and she has a farm named Foxtrot Farm. And she has healing food CSA, and she grows all sorts of mix of like native and nativized herbs and plants and things that you wouldn't typically see in a CSA, but are like really healing and good, and just full of nutrients and good connection. And she and I earlier last fall had an event where we harvested grape leaves and made dolmas, and it was just really nice to be in the forest and harvesting our foods, because that's a really true and beautiful connection with the gifts that our land gives us, and thinking about, again, that reciprocity. How can we give back to our spaces? And there's so much power within grapevines, and there's a plant called bittersweet right now. It's technically invasive, but it's pretty much here forever. So how can we work with the gifts, again, that our environments give us, and maybe weave those into baskets or fences, or really get creative in the ways that we express ourselves? So forests, I just have like so much love and appreciation for forests and all that they can teach us, and really flick us into a new paradigm of systems change. So I would like to show you this video here.
Every patch of earth unencumbered by concrete, where soil and atmosphere meet, be a portal to presence, a terrain of remembrance, a vote for survival in an unpromised future. These gardens are blueprints of interdependent destiny, intergenerational memory, saving seeds for food as remedy, reclaiming our great-great-great-grandmother's recipes, our ancestral technologies, Afro-Indigenous agroecology, dirt under fingernails, no shame or apology. In a time of manicured hands and monocrop lands, devalued labor and overpriced brands, we understand. Our food is grown in faraway places under neo-slavery, shipped thousands of miles by underslept drivers, prepared by dignified immigrants, diminished on night shifts, supper delivered to our doorsteps from a swipe of our fingerprints, stripped of virtue and nutrients. And who's gonna stop this? Our shelves are still stocked with processed products, toxic food made for profit to keep us lethargic, too tired to riot, rise up, or take office, filled up on fillers and starches, diet-related illness, the #1 killer of black and brown bodies. My people know what it's like to eat and still be starving. So we turning hardship into harvest, lawns and schoolyards into gardens, homegrown bounty in our palms. We come from soil and stardust. and so we conjure. Giving props to hood magicians who grow provisions for our kitchens. We smuggle spinach into prisons, transform the places that we live in. Trade psychosis for symbiosis and stay focused. Sprout sunflowers that tower on neighborhood blocks. Harvest raindrops on rooftops that water our crops. Propagate plant medicine for the metropolis, guarding our plots, because our gardens are not for profits or loss. Cross-pollinate the promise, fam. We got this. Take a deep breath. Restore calmness. With lemon balm bounty in our palms, hot peppers in our pockets, black-eyed peas spiraling up Lenape blue corn stalks with buttercup squash carpets, three sisters symbiotic, talking stories of solidarity on native territory. Migratory monarchs transcend borders, morning glories ascend fences. Pay attention to the lessons Mother Nature keeps expressing, how to multiply our blessings. For justice and sustenance amid glaring disparity, every seed saved will set us free. In an age of opulence and scarcity, every seed saved will set us free. In a time of intensifying violence and climate calamity, every seed saved will set us free. Hold on tight to the source. We have all that we need.
So that's Naima Penniman of Soulfire Farm. I actually think that their farm is really close to you guys. And they're pretty revolutionary space. They do a great job and education in kind of getting back to Afro-Indigenous roots and really focusing on healing. And again, that emphasis on local food systems is so strong because it really paves the way for community empowerment. So some ways, some buzzwords, things that have been arising as models or avenues for this sort of empowerment and movement include cooperative business structures. I don't know how familiar you all are with co-ops, but basically what we're trying to do there is redistribute power when it comes to commerce. We have Indigenous foodways and wisdom to learn from. I think we all come from common ancestors. This is information again that is embedded within our DNA, and we have to listen and really tap into our power that we have, and a lot of that is rooted in Indigenous foodways. Circular economies, we kind of tapped into that a little bit more or a little bit earlier, where we're talking about our inputs and outputs, really tying in and keeping each other fed. Solidarity economy is a fun new buzzword that I highly recommend looking into. It really emphasizes the need for cooperation and pluralism, and all sorts of pluralism means that there's a lot of different ways to do things, and each space kind of has its intrinsic power to express what it needs to express for healing in the form of economy and commerce. Highly recommend looking into solidarity economy. It's really fun. Maker spaces are on the up and coming as well. So there's one in Orange, Massachusetts. There's one in Springfield, Massachusetts, and plenty of other community centers where people get together and they make stuff. They share and they teach each other, and what that does really is creates a context for us to keep learning. And again, if we tap into the bioregional nature of trade and our spaces and the power of our natural environments to feed and clothe and house us, and make sure to give back within that process in the form of community and reciprocity. And some folks native to this land, I know it's an Ojibwe tradition, along with many other communities, is the gift of tobacco after a harvest, or taking something from say like the cedar trees, they would give back some tobacco in order to reciprocate. But anyways, yeah, maker spaces are a really good place to learn and teach each other, and remembering that diversity or pluralism is key within this, that there's no one way to approach the bioregional trade economy. There's no one way to plant our lands, and that every place has specific needs and potential for healing. And so I ask you, what role do you play within our ecosystems, in our food system, in our materials economy? And I just take a moment now to like feel something. Maybe it's like in your throat or your eyes or your belly or your heart, like maybe it's in your fingertips, and like just see what language comes up inside yourself when you think about the potential to act and like be a part of these new paradigms. And listen to those sensations and think about, who are you? What are your gifts? Are you a dancer? Are you a weaver? Are you a crafter? Are you a dreamer? Are you an engineer, a teacher, a cook, a family member, a gardener? All these niches, all these human attributes are critical to the cooperative future of localized food systems and economies. And most importantly is listening. I'm not sure how many of you routinely engage in dialogue-oriented spaces, but listening is just such a big part of the way that I have learned, and we gain so much and tap so much into our potential when we understand how we're related to the rest of the world and to our communities. And by listening to each other, by listening to the people and communities who are most impacted, to listen to ourselves and our souls of what we're really truly being called towards, that to me is how each of us is going to be able to tap into this system and really start to make some action. It's a little daunting, and sometimes I really take faith in the principles of intergenerational healing. Native communities to this land talk a lot about 7 generations and how critical that is for the healing process. And knowing that I'm not necessarily only living for me. I'm living for my ancestors, I'm living for my kin, I'm living for my community, and that healing and that evolution takes place over a long period of time. Like, think about all that has come before us that has gotten us to this place, and how we can really plant the seeds of the future to continue on. So no worries if you're not a revolutionary by the time you're 70, or if you haven't figured it out and tapped into all there is to learn. It's pretty complicated, but we got to start somewhere. And I really think that it starts within our food system. So I'll stop my share. Hopefully some of that rang true with you guys. And I would love to hear if you guys feel like sharing. I would love to hear if there's any questions you have, as well as maybe like what resonated with you most, and like where you see yourself, like what your niche is. And don't be shy.
Yeah.
Can't hear you. Can you speak up a little?
Yeah. I'm actually going to school to be an elementary education teacher, but my second major is in environmental studies. So I really like thinking about my niche, and I think it is my purpose to kind of educate children on their purpose in ecosystems and things like that. Because I think from a young age you should learn these things, and I think I learned it kind of later in life, and I think this is awesome to hear.
That's huge. Thanks for saying that. I think a lot of movements lately have been really rooted in youth empowerment, because there's so much to tap into with like young creative minds who have a little bit more access to that intuitive DNA that we talked a little bit about at the beginning of all of this. And yeah, thinking about all the symptoms that kiddos and youth express, like in the form of like ADD and, you know, health, you know, implications of our poor health and all these things like that. I was a teacher for a little bit myself and learned so much about myself and what everybody needs. So I really echo that, and that sounds really exciting.
Anyone else have anything they want to share? Have you guys heard of bioregional food systems before today? Is something new?
Are there other things that people can think of as far as like the things that they consume daily that they would love to see come from their local places?
I love bell peppers.
What was that? What did you say? A little louder.
Oh, I love bell peppers.
Bell peppers.
Every morning I make omelets, so I could probably I could probably look and find some local farmers who have eggs, maybe some bell peppers, other breakfast things, and just support the local people who are doing things. Seek them out.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Bell peppers are so good and juicy and delicious. But yeah, and they really taste even so much better and are like packed full of nutrients when they're grown regeneratively, which is really great. I'm not sure if you saw our piece on regeneration, but it will be in the recording, regenerative farming, but it'll be in the recording. And I also talked a little bit about added value and food season extension. And so there's local businesses. There's a one called the Franklin County Community Development Corporation, FCCDC. It's right here near me in Springfield. And what they have a big facility where they process and freeze things like bell peppers. So consumers such as yourself can tap into that non-seasonal food in a seasonal manner. So again, it takes that like cooperative lens to be like, okay, who's the bell pepper grower? Who's the person who's transporting it? How do we get it frozen? How do we get it to our people? And so there's a whole chain, a whole, you know, web of stuff that's going on there. So blessings to all the people who, you know, have grown your peppers to this point, what they do for you in your belly and your spirit, and how we can move forward to make sure that those local peppers are available for you.
What was the name of that cooperation that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's called the Franklin County Community Development Corporation, the FCCDC. And they make a couple of, I don't know how involved you guys are in some of the local products that they have, but or that we have here in Massachusetts, but Catalyst Kombucha is made in their facility, as well as Real Pickles. It's like as well as Appalachian Naturals. They're a salsa place, and a couple different businesses rent out at the FCCDC. So it's a really great community resource, and they freeze ginger and bell peppers and all sorts of other things for us to consume when we're off season. So yeah, they do much more than that, but it's a really great resource that takes collective effort. Any other reflections or questions? I live to hear from you guys, so let me know if there's something else that resonated with you.
Well, Eric and I are currently working on a project that we started for our GIS class. And making a map of food resources within Berkshire County. Kind of categorizing by farmers markets,
CSAs and trying to work on getting that published at the end of this semester to go out to people in the community.
Great. That's awesome. How do you see the concept of bioregionalism possibly folding into that GIS project?
I think definitely our goal with it initially was to just connect people to their local areas, because a lot of the times you'll know about 1 or 2 farm stands that are near you, but not necessarily everything else. So you kind of go to your local people for 1 or 2 products, and then the rest is at a grocery store that you don't really know where they're coming from. So yeah, more about just educating and getting people to know what's around them.
That's so great. Have you looked at the CISA webpage, Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture? Are you familiar with that? So go to buylocalfood.org, and CISA is I don't even know what you call it. I don't remember what the classification is as far as the type of community organization that it is, but it's one of the first of its kind, like in the whole country. And they have a map, like an interactive map, where you can look at the different products that they have, that the farmers produce throughout the area. And there might be some in the Berkshires that you can tap into and see. And I'm not sure if they do it with the GIS software. But yeah, you can like type in your zip code and radius. That might provide a little bit of inspiration for you. And then thinking about things too, like I make candles and I have beeswax. And so thinking about, crafters and other products that come from places might be a fun thing to fold in there. Like, again, thinking about that food as nourishment. It might like be way too broad for your like this specific project for this semester. But just like, holding that into the mindset of like what we consume and produce, and how mapping is a huge part of that. Huge part. I love it. That's great. Have fun. Any other?
questions?
Yeah.
That people can share?
If you do want to reach out to me, like if there's any project or something that comes up, whether it was a concept in this talk today, or like, this relates to some of your studies or anything like that, I would be happy to direct you to any resources. I've been kind of in this for a while as far as local food systems and those sorts of things go, organizations, whatever it might be. So Abby can give you my email, but I would be happy to either talk a little bit more about the philosophy, or like, with you as like your, not only your professional self, but your personhood, like if you wanted to tap into that a little bit more, or wanted to, discuss regenerative agriculture. I'd be so happy to talk, have any conversations with you guys, or answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. And thank you for giving this presentation and leading this dialogue, because it's been super informative and I really enjoyed it. I think you guys did too. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's so good to meet you guys. I'm really glad that you're interested in this stuff, and I highly encourage you to just keep spreading the word, and looking at things from that different perspective. There's a lot of potential there. So thank you so much, Abby. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.